Hey everyone. So this is now part 2 of my video interview, discussion, conversation with my mom. I totally disspaced on the fact that I didn't even introduce her. My mother's name is Mary, and she and I, thought that it would be a good idea for us to talk about our mutual experiences with Scientology and the differences and similarities between how Scientology used to be back in the day compared to how it is now, and how we, had very different experiences as a result of that, even though we both ended up leaving because we saw that it was not everything that it was really cracked up to be. In this part 2, we have moved past Mom's history with Scientology, like how she got in and how she got out. That's what we covered in part 1. And in this part, we'll be taking up some questions that I thought people who were watching might have about some of the differences and some of the things that she had experienced and encountered in Scientology. So I did my best to come up with what I thought were relatively hot topic items that people always ask me about, and that's what's featured in this video. And then in the next couple parts, we'll get into some much more serious discussion about disconnection and that sort of thing. That's coming. But I think you'll enjoy this, and I look forward to your comments and feedback on this one. So here's my mom. Let's talk about something subject matter wise, right? As opposed to chronological order of things. Yeah, exactly. Because you and I had this conversation a while ago, and I thought it was an important one. And that is, when you got into Scientology, it was a very different Scientology than when I got into Scientology, right? I started doing, and we'll talk more about the details of how I did Scientology when I was a kid and stuff, but I didn't really officially get into it until 1985, when I went down to the org and started doing services, sort of on my own determinism, right? Or sort of because I wanted to, is what I mean by that.
Didn't you do it with Doug?
Yeah.
Didn't you do a couple classes with Doug?
And that's how it started.
Yeah.
But when I got involved in 85, right, it had already been morphing. Yeah, been changing, right? Because, Hubbard died in 1986, and Miscavige had already, we know this now, Miscavige had already taken over and was really changing it to, what I would call its worst possible interpretation. But when you got in 1971, David Miscavige was, like 3 years old or something, or 11 years old or something. It was not anywhere on anybody's radar, right? So let's talk about, what was Scientology like when you got in?
Fun.
And how? How was it fun? Like, what was?
It was new. Okay, the first thing that when I went to that original lecture, again, it was in the Mission Network, and it was Upstat. When Ron talked about Upstat, the Mission Network was Upstat.
Meaning it put on a good presentation, a good show.
People looked professional. They acted professional. They were polite. They had a building that was maintained. They had nice furniture. We had what we needed to, operate with. So it wasn't
There was toilet paper. That's always the fallback thing on orgs. They don't have any toilet paper.
If I had seen the LA org before I had seen the Pasadena Mission, I would never have even thought about doing anything
back then.
there.
The LA,
Oh, and the people were really nice, but my gosh, it was just horrible.
Wow.
And so it was really hard for us in the Mission. It was hard for us to go to the org and go, oh yeah, you guys we're really gravitating toward you, because we knew we were doing it better than they were. We knew that we were.
Right.
We didn't know why. We didn't know any of the politics of it. But anyway, the first lecture that I went to, I had been raised Catholic. I had left the Catholic Church after I got married. And the guy in the lecture said, he got me. He just really put it out there and got me. He said, so if you were ever involved in any other religions, you might have been taught that you have a soul. He said, so when you die, your body gets buried, your soul goes to heaven. What happens to you? and it was like getting shot right between the eyes with something that I'd never ever looked at before. And I had gone to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, and Catholic nursing school. So I'd had a lot of Catholicism thrown down my throat. But I never even thought of that question. And so then I went, whoa, what? And he said, well, that's what we're going to talk about in Scientology. We're going to talk about you. What about you as a spiritual being? And that just opened up a whole new window for me. So I was, and I wasn't looking at Scientology as a religion at that time at all. But that got me, that question got me thinking. So I thought, So I went on and did a personality test. And of course, because we were at that time having, problems in our relationship and our marriage, that was ruining my life. I mean, I knew that there was something there that I wasn't doing right and that Larry wasn't doing right. And so that got me. And so it was one step after another. And he was all gung-ho about the communications course anyway and said, you're going to love this and blah, blah, blah. And I did. I really liked it. So, and I liked the staff members, and I didn't find anything not to like for a long time. I liked the study tech. I was willing to continue on each one of those steps. I wasn't being harassed or harangued or...
So it wasn't like sitting you down and beating on you for every penny in your bank account and...
I think that there was some of that.
Yeah.
I remember not having a lot of extra money for a lot of extra stuff. But I will say this, because we were still doing our jobs, and Larry and I both just said, no, we're not quitting our jobs. I think there was a point where we were on, I think there might have been a point where we were on full-time staff, or maybe one of us was. I just don't remember all that much right now. But, we weren't giving up being able to take care of you or being able to, adopt another kid, or we were living our lives. I mean, it wasn't like a big, it's not like we gave everything away. We were doing all right.
Right. And I guess as mission staff members, you weren't particularly being regged for things all the time.
Well,
you guys would be the ones doing it.
Barney had an idea that I didn't see practiced at the orgs at all, which was all of his staff members were going to be trained, if not audited. That we were all going to be actively working on getting our posts, getting trained for our posts and for ourselves personally. And he was big on that, and we went along with that. We could see the value of that. Mm-hmm. So and that is unusual for, at least now, for the orgs, right? I know.
That you came up in a situation where the person in charge insisted that you get Scientology.
Yeah, he did.
Right.
It's apparently, when your dad and I would watch you go through what you were going through in Santa Barbara, the hardest thing for us was, you were getting trained for your post, which we expected. Mm-hmm. But for your personal, trip up the bridge, it was very hard for us to watch that not happen for you.
Right. You know? It was a struggle.
Yeah.
And I eventually did get some auditing, but yeah, it was tough.
We thought it was terrible.
Yeah, well, because it was. But that's actually a good highlight. I mean, it just, differences,
It totally goes against the principle of, hey, I'm going to deliver Scientology to you, and I don't know much about it at all because I haven't had any auditing or training. What?
Right.
Come on, how does that work?
Exactly. So now you also mentioned that it was fun, and and we talked earlier when we discussed this about the sense of community and the how everybody was friends with everybody else, like socially outside of the church and whatnot too.
Our staff was, we did.
Like what was that like?
We did a lot of drinking back in those days. It was actually, it's very safe though, because most Scientologists didn't drink a lot, and they didn't. Nobody did drugs. Nobody that we knew ever did drugs. So our recreation was, having some beers and a barbecue and stuff like that. But we just enjoyed each other's company. We enjoyed talking about Scientology, even, about wondering what the upper levels were like, or I don't know. It wasn't all Scientology because there were kids and birthday parties and stuff like that too. But it was a sense of purposefulness, I guess, and that gives you a good feeling. Even if you don't always like what the other guy's doing, or even if you're getting hollered at by somebody, it was with an underlying understanding that we're trying to get somewhere. We're trying to make this mission successful. We're trying to make people understand Scientology because there's something here that's very valuable. That was, the thought at the time. And it was shared. It wasn't pounded in anybody's head. It was just, I don't know, kind of that way. But I was very idealistic, and so I probably saw more of the good. If there was any bad, I probably saw more of the good and tried to fix the bad. Gosh, there were some really just strange things that happened.
Like what?
Oh, okay. Just things people would tell you, personal things in people's lives that you would just not even, you were a safe person for them to talk to. I was a trained ethics officer as well as a supervisor. And in those areas, I took that very seriously in the sense that I had a responsibility to be there for people, to be a communication terminal for people. And I wanted to be a safe terminal for people, again, without being wishy-washy, but, to practice what I was preaching. So people would open up and they would tell you a lot of stuff, and you just kind of went, I have no business knowing this stuff, but, I'm going to relate it to Scientology and for the purpose that they told me, and I'm going to give them something, purposeful for them to do about or with that, and try to channel it to the right people and get things handled, And so it worked. What can I say?
Right.
When it works, it works. When people work, whatever it is, and they do it with good in their heart, something good comes from it, usually.
Yeah, exactly. Was there a lot of ethics used back then?
Not like I hear that it is today. Nothing like that. The ethics that I learned or interpreted was different than punishment. We didn't use ethics for punishment. We used ethics to get people out of the situations they were in so that they could go on to better their lives. So and it took me a while because I was raised in an era of punishment. When we were kids, we got smacked around and we got, little pictures are seen and not heard. It was a strict upbringing. But I knew that ethics was different than that. For me, ethics was like a dome over all of the rest of Scientology. And it was clear glass, and you kept it clear. And the way that you kept it clear was through ethics. So that was just a thing I had in my head, that if that dome was clear all the time, everything underneath it was working well. And ethics kept that glass clean. So I just kind of had this perception that that's how it was different than punishment. You see what I mean? And that everybody had that ability to have that little clean glass around their life. They could do that.
Right. And it was sort of a kind of a shield sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it kept everything
clean. And you were an ethics officer.
For a while.
So you actually were applying this to other people and whatnot.
Yeah.
So were people back then being, hit up for money if they had to make amends for things? Was
no.
there... Okay.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, the way that you're going to get out of this is buy your way out? No.
Yes. Catholic indulgences, man. Yeah, that's right. That's a thing now. That's how people do their amends. They'll pay.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Ethics officers sell all kinds of books. And
that's why That's how the Lutheran Church got started. Did you know that?
In protest
Back in
of
the
that?
day, back in the day,
Yeah.
there was this guy who, Martin Luther, he was a monk, I think, and he went to Rome, and he saw that they were, paying to get into heaven.
Yeah.
He went, this isn't right. No, I not in my ethics cycles. But
Right.
we were a mission here. That's a big difference, though. You're talking from an org and a Sea Org viewpoint.
That's true.
And this was a mission, and they were different. These were people that just walked in off the street. They didn't have, and if they walked in, there was more chance that they hadn't heard anything bad about Scientology yet. So, so they wanted something. So, if we gave that to them, they were fine.
Now, there's another topic I want to ask about too, because again, this is actually an important difference between then and now. Masturbation, was that a big problem ethics-wise back then?
I never, ever, seriously,
Right.
never came up. If it had come up, I wouldn't have done anything with it. What the heck?
Right.
Come up.
Yeah,
No,
it's
it
a
was
it's a
not
total thing.
It was not a thing.
Right. So,
Indiscretion was adultery.
like adultery,
was,
yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Homosexuality? Not a thing. Yeah, see, the whole character of the church has changed in that regard, and I think that's one of the things that, where we talk about David Miscavige coming in the 80s and the Scientology becoming the worst possible interpretation of itself, where you take the worst of what Hubbard said and you highlight those things and you make those
Apparently,
the important things.
For us, it didn't come up enough to. I don't remember talking to a homosexual. I don't remember it. I just don't remember it coming up. Whether they weren't regged to even get to me, I don't know. So other people at that time, including your dad, may have had a whole different perception of that. But it wouldn't have hit my lines.
Right. But you don't recall there being an attitude about it within Scientology.
Never spoken that I. But you and I have had conversations where you said, Ron wrote, different things, and in a couple of the books, I'm sure he's made statements about that. And I guess I probably remember thinking that they were kind of somewhere along the lower tone levels, but it was not a thing that crossed our plate that much.
Right. Yeah, now it kind of is. Interesting. I mean, it certainly crossed my plate when I was a staff member. And
did it?
Oh yeah, we had 3 instances that I can recall of homosexual people, LGBT people, coming on for services. Right. One of them, a man who was just classic. I mean, hairdresser, flamboyant, very bright colors. I mean, just stereotype, and nicest guy, but spent years trying to cure his homosexuality with Scientology, to the point where he was sent down to Los Angeles to get special auditing for it, and and did his best to keep himself from dramatizing his aberrations, as they called it, right? In other words, he could not freely express how he actually felt,
Right.
because Scientology considers that homosexuality is a mental illness. It's right out of Dianetics, actually, and then Science of Survival. Hubbard really lays it on about how these people need to be gotten rid of. So it's
See, if that had been a big issue when I was on staff, I wouldn't have been able to accept that, because as a nurse, you treat anything and anyone, and I don't care what their age, sex, gender, it doesn't matter. You take people as they are.
Right.
And so that would have been a big problem for me had that come across my lines.
Yeah.
So again, being in the mission network, we weren't delivering the grades. We weren't delivering, not initial. I mean, we were delivering public services initially.
Okay. Meaning beginning introductory services.
Exactly.
In Scientology, public services is a special expression for new public services, right? Things that are going to introduce people to Scientology.
And that was what the mission did.
That's what it was for. Yeah.
Yeah. And then eventually we delivered more and more
Mm-hmm.
because we were capable, because our people were trained.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So anyway, but for me, maybe they just kind of kept me. We're all the,
I
we're
don't
all
think
the
so.
easy people were.
Yeah, I know you weren't the only person I've heard this from, right? Which is why I thought, I wanted to highlight the some of the differences.
There was a big difference. I mean, back in those days, there was a difference between the mission network and the org network. And the Sea Org, they were somewhere else. They were like the GO. They were, they ran the other stuff too. They ran the, like AO and stuff, but.
The advanced orgs.
Yes.
Right.
But they weren't bad guys, I mean, they were delivering services. The only time I ever, really.
Well, and for the most part, the guys who are delivering services in the Sea Org these days are still pretty good guys.
Yeah.
The
The Regis were fine. I mean, they had to like you, and we ended up liking them because they were helping us figure out how to get the money for going on.
Right.
So it was a different flow. It was a very different flow. And that's why it never did cross my mind that it was a cult until later.
Right.
Because I honestly think that it wasn't being run that way. There were a lot of different bosses, like we had the mission holders between us and the Sea Org and Ron. Whoops. And so we didn't have that much to do with the Sea Org even.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
no, definitely.
Except for the upper levels. And we also knew that, like AO, for instance, they were trying to spiffy themselves up eventually. I don't know if it ever hit the LA org, but AO was, looking good, and we were all kind of happy at one point that, gosh, they're becoming more upstat now, and,
Right.
So there were some positive things that we saw, but it was different, Chris.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that, just so people would understand why the 70s were a time of real expansion for Scientology. No nonsense. I mean, there were a lot of people coming in, and that was, I believe, its period of its greatest growth.
Yeah.
Right. And like we've talked about, you had this experience in the early 80s where Carl Barney and the Sea Org, the mission holders and the Sea Org are starting to butt heads. They're bitching about each other. They're complaining because, you were hearing Carl Barney and the mission holders talk about, that's what was going on at the Sea Org too.
I'm sure.
They hated these guys.
Yeah.
Right.
And there was a point where we were aware that the orgs definitely resented the mission network.
Mm.
Yeah, there was a point where I remember that happening.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Hubbard's policies say the orgs are supposed to be the professional places, the top-notch places, the guys where, you could always, technically they were superior, right? There was this whole superior org image sort of policy, but in the real world...
It was the opposite.
Exactly.
And we knew it.
Right.
What do you do with that?
Right. Well, check this out. The missions were run, or managed, I should say, by the Sea Org, or at least the management structure that existed for the missions was like 2 or 3 people. The management structure that existed for the orgs was hundreds of people, Sea Organization members.
Wow.
And the orgs were being micromanaged, like they still are, while the missions were pretty much left in the hands of the mission holders.
Right.
And when the mission holders were competent,
right,
successful businessmen who knew what they were doing, they flourished.
Yeah.
The orgs never flourished because they're run by people who don't know what they're doing and being micromanaged by L. Ron Hubbard's directions that this is how you're supposed to do things.
Well, looking back on that too, I don't want to say that the mission holders were all these little cherubs and,
Right. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, because they weren't.
They weren't.
No.
They were fighting for their place in the Scientology hierarchy of some kind or another. They had a good thing going and they knew it. And they were in competition with each other, but friendly competition. The orgs was a whole nother matter. But I remember Barney kind of toward the end of my time there was he was floating around the idea, and maybe he even went farther than that, about offering finances for people who are taking
Scientology
mission
services.
And that would have been a big conflict. That would not have been okay.
Right.
But I think he would have found a way to try to do that, which, wasn't all right. So that was just the only thing that I can think about. And if he was doing it, I can't imagine that some of the other guys weren't considering it too.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things actually that I know is the mission holders, by the way, we haven't really totally defined that, but that's the person who actually gets the rights from Scientology officially to use the trademarks and copyright to Scientology and deliver these services. And what they were supposed to do, correct me if I'm wrong, was send up 10% as tithing or something, right? So. Like just straight right off the top, 10% of the money goes up to Hubbard, right? And in fact, the way it was set up was the franchises, they were originally called franchises, not missions, right? Like McDonald's franchises. And they were set up that way so that the money went straight to Hubbard. So there was actually a legal liability when this thing came out with them setting up a credit union, setting up their own credit union, and setting up their own financial system with loans and things like this, setting up their own little bank. This legal liability would have connected straight to Hubbard.
Oh,
and he was already in hiding because he had been,
that's right.
What's the word? Convicted in absentia in France for fraud. Yeah. He was running from the IRS. I mean, he was running.
See, we didn't know.
Right.
We didn't know any about that. It was like, what?
Right.
There wasn't. The internet wasn't what it is today.
There was no
Cell
internet
phones
then.
didn't exist except for doctors. We were fed what they wanted us to know. So even though we knew about the raid,
I was just about to ask you about that.
Yeah, sure, we knew about that, but we thought that was terrible. All of those confessionals, all of those PC folders, and we went, oh my God, that's a terrible thing to do. How can they do that?
Right.
Anyway, they were the bad guys.
This was the 77 raid by the FBI.
Yeah. So they were the bad guys. We were the good guys. We were trying to get church status, state by state by state, and that was a big fight. And we wanted to, make sure that happened. And so when it didn't happen or happened fast enough, we were just like, oh, those bad guys, they just don't get us. Anyway, so there was a lot of the idealism that we also had, but
right.
You chose a line. You were on one side or you were on the other.
Did you guys have, just totally separate topic, but again, an important difference. Did you guys have like 7 or 8 different international events that you had to go to every couple months back then?
No. The events that we went to because we wanted to, because they were big events.
Mm-hmm. What were events?
We didn't go to that many. Ron's birthday thing was a big deal. We would go to that sometimes.
And where would those events be held?
Well, there were 2 that were down in LA that I remember, really big events. Oh gosh, if it wasn't his birthday, probably the release of a new book or something like that. No, we didn't. We were out in the burbs. We
See, what happens now is every single Scientologist is called frantically 10, 15, 20 times every couple months to attend an international event gathering at the Shrine Auditorium or at the Hollywood Bowl or at the, at some theater where they've rented out to show David Miscavige on video or in person come out and talk for 3 hours.
I think I went to one big event, and it might have been at the Shrine Auditorium. I don't even remember what it was. I don't even remember what it was, Chris.
One.
Yeah. I mean, again,
all those years.
We were the mission. If the org had an event, we would go to the org's event.
Yeah.
Because it was close. It was close, and it had something to do with us usually. But for us to go, no, there wasn't a big pressure. And as far as the IAS goes, it was a newsletter or something. I don't
It didn't
remember.
exist until 1984.
Yeah, I don't remember it being any big deal.
Yeah, no, there was no IAS. There was no there was no straight donation fundraising activity going on in Scientology. By straight donation, I mean you give us your money and we're not giving you anything back. Right, that's a straight
I
donation.
think, didn't they do a newsletter or something before they ever did any of that other stuff? Or seemed
I mean,
like
they've had this magazine they've been putting out since 1984 called Impact Magazine.
To me, that was what the IAS was.
Right. Yeah. It grew over the next couple years into this voracious, shark appetite sort of thing. But that by the time that was happening, like really happening, you had pretty much left.
Yeah.
Along
with the differences that we're talking about today, when I left Scientology, I was still seeing it as what I knew. What I knew it to be. I knew that when you were in the Santa Barbara org, you were having money troubles. I knew one time, you were having troubles with some girl that you had broken up with, and you were losing weight, and I was worried about that.
Yeah, that happened.
Yeah, it did. But I didn't realize, and I thought that when you got in the Sea Org, I thought some of it was your idealism, but also some of it was trying to reduce the stress of trying to work as, in real life, as well as being a staff member. And I remember that being a big stressor for you, because you never had enough money, because they always wanted you to be on staff more than on work, and you wanted to be on staff more than work, but you couldn't afford it.
That's right.
So, I thought that the Sea Org was also your way of solving that problem.
It was.
Where you could just totally be a Scientologist 100% of the time. Well, I didn't know that when you were getting into the Sea Org, that it was like it was for you. I didn't know that. And you certainly didn't share that with me.
No.
So had I known that it was as bad as it was, I would have maybe had a different game plan,
Yeah.
But my feeling, but I didn't know, which always seems like the wrong excuse. I mean, even
there's no,
even the policemen don't buy that one.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Sorry, ma'am, if you didn't know, that's not an excuse.
But if I didn't tell you, how would you have known? I mean, I joined the Sea Org in 1995. There was no internet for you to go, go looking up and Googling. There was no way for you to know.
And I never did. Did you know that? I never looked up Scientology on the internet. I mean, I guess because it was more of a personal experience for me at that point, and that I wasn't going to find my personal answers there anyway.
Right.
But I didn't really have a big thing about, oh no, I'm going to find out what it's really like, because I just didn't, I was busy doing other stuff. Had I known that the Sea Org had turned into the type of organization it was when you were in it, I would have changed my game plan about being more forthright in our communication, being more honest in our communication, or me being more honest with you about what was going on. Because had I known that there was that kind of an abusive situation, there's no way I couldn't not have done more than I did.
Yeah.
I had no clue.
And you're not supposed to. I mean, it's actually not just that you didn't know because you didn't go find out. It's at the time period up until the 2000s when you could have gone on the internet and found out. Before that point, it's actively covered up. Sea Org members are told it is out security to tell your parents or your friends or your family anything about what goes on. What happens in the Sea Org stays in the Sea Org, right? That sort of thing. That is the entire attitude of that group. So it takes a very active curiosity to find out or to draw it out of the person, right?
Yeah.
Which kind of leads me to the next thing we can talk about, right? Which is